Good morning. My clock is saying it's 9 o'clock, and so at this time, with all 5 commissioners being in attendance, I would call to order the March 29th, 2022 agenda of the Douglas County Board of Commissioners special meeting regarding the budget. I will be leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance today, so if you'd please rise and repeat with me. Pledge to the greatest country on earth. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Well, now I would ask those members in the chambers today to please shut off their electronic devices. Not looking at anybody in particular, Patrick, so anyways. At this time, public comment will be taken. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker unless additional time is granted by the board chairperson. The Board of Commissioners uses timing lights to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to speak. You will see a green light when you begin, a yellow light, which indicates that you have 30 seconds left and should conclude your comments. Once the light turns red, we ask you to please sit down. In addition to open and public comment will also be taken on administrative agenda items that are identified for possible action and then additional closing public comment. So at this time, public comment will be taken on those items that are within the jurisdiction and control of the Douglas County Board of Commissioners. Is there any? Oh, okay, we do have some public comment. Ask you to please state your name and sign in. Thank you.
Good morning, Bobby Thompson for the record. I would just like to say this morning, it's the 49th anniversary of the close of the Vietnam War. And for all of you who have served, and especially for Vietnam veterans today, I'd like to say thank you.
Were you home by then, John? No? Okay. So. Okay. No, but you were out of country by then. Yeah. So, okay. Are there any additional public comments? Mr. Ingalls.
Who all was given, just the board members or in general? Anyway, this relates to a lot of indices for inflation that are governmental. And I'm sure that Ms. Willoughby has heard the old accounting adage, figures don't lie, but liars can figure. And I don't trust the government at all with these numbers they're putting out. It's going to be a lot worse. And you start looking at things like the changing the value of the dollar, or making the dollar no longer the reserve currency world. I mean, there's just so much going on that is going to impact all of us personally and our budget. And it's just about impossible to forecast what's going to happen. So anyway, just a word of caution on relying on any of these numbers. Thank you.
Terry Willoughby for the record. I will actually be addressing that in a few minutes.
Thank you. Is there any additional public comment here in chambers? If not, Ms. Johnson, is there any public comment online?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Marcia Johnson for the record. At this time, there's no public comment online.
Very good. Then we'll close public comment, and I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda. One thing that I would like to do on this is flip-flop items number 1 and number 2, and hear from Mr. Morgan on Community Services first, and then we'll go into the budget. So entertain that motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the agenda as presented with the exception of changing number 1 and number 2.
Second. Okay, motion by Commissioner Rice, seconded by Commissioner Ingalls to approve the administrative agenda as presented with the change of item 2 to first and then item 1. Sensing no discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. So at this time, I will read item 2 into the agenda and ask Mr. Morgan to come forward for presentation only. Presentation on the operations of community services divisions and the room tax, senior services, and social services funds, presented by Community Services Manager Scott Morgan. And this is presentation only, so we will not be taking public comment on that. Did you, Ms. Willoughby, you had some comments to make just prior to that, I take it? So, Ms.
Thank you.
Willoughby.
Terry Willoughby for the record. Just a couple of follow-up items from yesterday. There was a comment about the assistant court clerk during the court's presentation, and that was my mistake when I misspoke. It was actually entered appropriately in the budget as the apprentice court clerk. When I gave my presentation, I misspoke and called it assistant. So I wanted to let you know it is budgeted appropriately. Also, there was a question about the payments to the districts, the GID, and I did follow up on that with Ms. Bergens, and the payments are remitted at the first of the month for everything collected the prior month, any cash balance. So there's no delay on that. And also, I did provide the article. It's a best practice on using inflation indices. However, I wanted to follow up on the comments of how we look at our numbers and what factors and assumptions we used. And we really tried to use more accurate numbers than just indices, where we asked our departments to reach out to the vendors. You could see when we did the human capital assessment, we used information from our neighboring agencies and regional partners. So it's a combination of things to get the most accurate numbers possible. Of course, we can't foretell the future. But with that, that's it. I'll turn it over to Scott. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Willoughby, for those clarifications. And Mr. Morgan, and I see you have your Community Services Assistant, Deputy Director. What's the exact title? I'm not sure.
Scott Morgan, Community Services Director, and it is appropriate to introduce the Assistant Community Services Director, Brooke Ady, because I'm going to be passing the torch on this presentation to her. After 28 years of doing this, it is time to hear a fresh voice and a new perspective over the budget presentation. I may be chirping in a couple of times, but I'm going to let Brooke run the show. So with that, we'll also have Budget Analyst Senior Jeff Bonner joining us. Because of the change, he's on his way, as well as Park Superintendent Ryan Stanton may be joining us at some point in time during the presentation as well. So with that, I'd like to introduce Assistant Community Services Director Brooke Ady.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioners, for giving me the opportunity to talk about our community services programs and our budget. Go ahead, next slide. Oh, here's a. Okay. 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 Oh, okay. I think there's a delay. Okay, we have quite a PowerPoint presentation for you today. We want to take the opportunity to talk about our different programs and our revenue sources and our expenses. So to start off, here's our mission for us at Community Services. Go ahead, next slide. Today we're going to talk about social services, parks, recreation, senior services, and DART. Animal services and weed control are also part of our department, but they are being mentioned with the general fund budget presentations. So these are the funding streams that we're going to talk about today. We have funding 234, which is our room tax and supports parks and recreation. Social services is funded under 215 and 216, and then our senior services under 260. The statutory requires these funds to be used for these purposes. Here's our room tax fund. Since we're an external department, we provide support and services to other departments and to the public, primarily with the room tax. The room tax fund is dedicated to parks and recreation, promotion at the lake, valley, and the state. Next slide, please. These are the services that are funded by that are operated under our parks department. And here are our recreation services that we operate. Many of these slides have a lot of information, so if you have questions at any point, let me know. A lot of it is provided for your reference. So under the room tax, here are our revenue sources that we're going to discuss. Room tax that supports parks and rec. Specifically, the room tax is what I'm going to focus on. Our transient lodgers licensing tax, which I'll try to refer to as TLLT since it's quite a mouthful, and the $5 surcharge. Next slide. There are two pieces to the room tax that I would like to highlight. One is the state mandated room tax that has been authorized under NRS to collect 10 cents room tax at both the lake and the valley. The second piece is a county ordinance that created the TLLT, which added an additional 4 cents to the lake and 13 cents to the valley. The total room tax collected is estimated for the 2022-2023 budget year is $19,297,351 in room tax and the TLLT combined. So if you look at the slide, you can see our history over the last 3 budget cycles, the 2 budget cycles, and then what we're projecting for the future. Next slide. Here's a breakdown of all the funds that are collected. 63% of the room tax goes to Douglas County Promotion and the Convention Center. 27% of it goes to Parks and Recreation. And then there are several pass-throughs that are not in the room tax budget that go to state promotion, the Tahoe Transportation District, and to county roads. Here's the breakdown of the 14 cents that's generated at the lake. 65% of the 14 cents goes to promotion, and this amount is below in the box, it's highlighted red. And then 25% of the funds go to the Parks and Recreation, which is Kale up at the lake. And then here is the breakdown of the 13 cents. So 43% of the funds go to promotion, and that is the amount below, again, just in the valley. And 46% of the funds go to Parks and Recreation. This is a line item report of the room tax budget. It shows the total amount for the valley and the lake, and this is what you will see in the budget. The amounts shown that are not in the budget reports are pass-throughs that are taken out. So these funds never come to us, and that's in the middle column that says not showing in the budget report. At the bottom, you see the room tax plus the $5 surcharge and the pass-through funds for a total budget of $21,744,650,000. So this is the total amount that's collected. Not all of it you will see in our budget. So to talk a little bit about the $5 surcharge. In 2019, SB 461 created the $5 a night surcharge to all hotel rooms and other transient lodges within the Lake Tahoe Township. This is included in our room tax revenue. So it's these funds minus a 1% administrative fee is distributed to the Tahoe Douglas Visitors Authority. As you can see, the actual amount is more than what we've budgeted for, just to remain a little conservative. The room tax revenues can be greatly impacted by things happening with weather, fires. If there's a lot of snow, the passes might be closed, or as we've seen with the Caldor and Tamarack fires, the mountain was closed, no rooms were being used. But right now, the room tax is very strong, it's looking very strong. Any questions regarding the room tax? Okay. The next revenue source we're going to talk about is our sales tax for Parks and Recreation, the library, the airport, and the seniors. It's called PALS. 20% of this tax is for Parks and Recreation, 25% of it is for senior programs, and 55% of it goes to the library. This is a tax that was voter approved specifically for these services. As you can see, the airport's amount is 0 as they are self-sufficient. Any questions regarding PALS? Okay. Our next revenue source is the utility operator fee. This fee was authorized in 2011 by county ordinance, specifically for the community and senior center operations of the building to handle the cost specifically for the building. The increase in the fee for public utilities is 0.5%. So this is an additional revenue source, and currently this year we're budgeted at $413,426. Any questions on the utility operator fee tax? Okay. The final revenue source comes from charges for services. As you know, programs are still recovering from COVID. We average an annual of $2 million a year for charges, and we're hoping to get back to that and to be able to grow our programs, increase participation. We did see some increases in some of our programs. Our revenue and in fees at Topaz Lake more than doubled. Use was very high at the lake. And we're starting to see increase in fees and pick up at the community center. Next slide. And then here is our, okay. I'm gonna pass this over to Scott to talk about the transfer in from the general fund.
We list that as a revenue source. This is Scott Morgan, Community Services Director, but it's really a reimbursement. When we talk about the transfer in to the room tax fund from the general fund, it is a reimbursement from a prior year's worth of services that the room tax fund provides to the general fund. In summary, it maintains all the landscape medians around Douglas County that are under the county's responsibility. Every time we take on a new road, your Parks Department takes on the maintenance, water, power of those landscape medians. We also maintain facilities like this, the outdoor portions of this facility, and the JLEC building, the library, and other county facilities not under the control of the room tax fund. We calculate what the costs are from the previous year, and that's what makes the transfer into the room tax fund. So it is a reimbursement. Also, it has been a tradition of mine to talk about ordinance 1214 back in 2007, and unless we talk about it, we will forget. In 2007 was the start of the Great Recession. Departments were looking at taking 10% reductions, particularly the room tax fund, which is the most volatile fund in Douglas County, was looking at a 15 to 20% reduction. This meant things like closing the satellite dining locations in North County, South County. It also meant either eliminating or charging youth sports for utilities such as ball field lights and field prep, passing some of those costs on, pretty serious reductions. And in 2007, our residents filled this place and filled it on multiple occasions, asking for restoring of their services and in turn begging for the single largest tax increase in Douglas County's history without the vote of the people. Douglas County at the time implemented a 2 cents. We just talked a little bit about the utility operator fee, the half cent that went to operate the community center. They implemented 2 cents of the utility operator fee, generating over $1.6 million. Those funds went to the general fund in support of transfers, not so much this transfer because it's a reimbursement, but transfer for the senior center and transfer for the Douglas County Library. And not one person spoke in opposition to this, which was very strange for a community of our nature. That's just how valued our library services, our senior services, and our recreation services were to our community. And so I bring this up to say when we do talk about transfers, because they are sometimes a tough pill to swallow, taking general fund money and supporting other services in the county. It is supported by this utility operator fee. You can say that the transfer for this year is $219,000. Those are actual costs. If we have a small snow year, then the cost is less. If we have a heavy snow year, primarily in the valley, we anticipate we've had a pretty dry winter so far. Just one snow event that we've had to provide those services. So that's what really causes it to fluctuate. The landscape maintenance is something that is more consistent. And I'm going to have Brooke talk about something special that we did this year in response to evaluating those services.
Thank you. Brooke 80 again. I want to take a minute to talk about a project that we did, which was a privatization analysis. And what it really was an opportunity for us to look at actual fair market costs for doing services for the landscaping and snow removal for our non-park facilities. So these are all of the activities and the facilities that the Parks Department serves that are outside of their room tax funded operations. So what we did is we went out, we did a request for proposal back in February. We met with the Public Works Department. We met with private service providers of landscaping and snow removal to see what activities we should be including in the request for proposal. We wanted to create a proposal that providers would bid for. The intent of the contract was to then award a private contractor to do snow removal and all of the landscaping activities. The contract would then sit under Public Works, and we also wrote a supplemental request to have a maintenance assistant to oversee the activities of the contract and do all of the services outside of what was written in the request for proposal. So for landscaping activities, we really limited it to mow and blow. But there's a whole lot more that goes into that as far as, fall maintenance, irrigation, managing the sprinklers, and really being here on a day-to-day basis to make sure that the grounds look good. We put the request for bid out. We came back. We had 2 proposals. The lowest bid showed us that the county is providing the service at the lower cost and is really more efficient and effective. We have a staff of people who are able to go out very quickly to address the needs of the community when it comes to the landscaping and snow removal activities. And so it did show us that we are providing the services at a fair market cost. So we will continue to provide these services through the Parks Department via a reimbursement from the general fund. Any questions on any of that? Did you want to add any more, Scott?
Scott Morgan, Community Services Director. This was kind of an eye-opener. It is a service that we were interested in doing. We felt we were pretty competitive in the market because we had talked to some of the local landscaping companies and found out that what they're paying their landscapers is more than what we're paying our county employees. So we kind of felt we were in the market, but we still wanted to do this analysis. And for a Reno firm, it got a little close. And what we compared it to is that $219,000 that you saw on the previous slide. That's the dollar value that we were proposing to eliminate, reduce out of our budget, reduce those expenses, and allow that money to be spent out of Public Works for these contracts. What we also found is it wasn't even close for snow removal. Because of where the real efficiency comes in is you have your parks crew here every day with their parks vehicles, with their plows on it, and they're able to respond almost immediately when the snow begins, as opposed to a company where we wrote in the proposal that it was a 3-inch standard, that once it hits 3 inches, then they send a crew down, and it is unlikely they would be able to respond with the same amount of efficiency that our Parks Department was. So we even looked at, well, let's just get rid of one of them and keep the snow removal and eliminate this transfer for reimbursement cost and just get rid of the landscape maintenance. But it appeared that the county is providing value. We are still committed to analyzing this If we believe that our rates become higher than the private sector, then I think this is something we should look at again, just to make sure we are operating at the optimal level of efficiency within Douglas County.
So before you go forward, Mr. Morgan, I have a question. I know that when we perform these services, I know we've been down in staff. Have we been able to provide those services with adequate staff through that process? Sometimes you have to hire an outside firm. Not necessarily in this case, but I'm just saying that the common practice, of course, is if you don't have the staff to perform services, then you have to go out to an outside firm to do that. Have we been able to adequately service those needs with the staff that we have on? Because I know that your department especially has been deficient in staff.
Scott Morgan, Community Services Director, Mr. Chair. We have been able to do these functions because they're a priority for us. It's important for us to have the grounds of this facility and the JLAC building looking as they do today. It's a very visual facility, so that particular ranger, we have one ranger in charge of what we call the non-park facility maintenance and medians, and so that position has not been affected, whereas other positions, mainly seasonals, throughout our park system, have been affected. And that has affected primarily not the public safety of our facilities, but the deferred maintenance, things like staining and fence repair and painting and keeping those things up in our buildings. And that is really where we have felt that, but not so much in this particular department or service level. And when it does snow, because it's public safety, it's really important that we keep our substation, the JLAC building open. That's a first priority. That's the first place that gets plowed up at the lake and down here in the Carson Valley. Then we go to our facilities as they open. So there is a priority, a pecking order, and some facilities don't get their parking lots done. For example, Lampe Park would be the last one. We know people aren't going to be driving into the park, so that facility won't get the same service level that we do a facility that opens at 8, and we have the public that's invited, the senior center, because the seniors arrive early, and we don't want our parking lot to be icy, and we don't want any slip and falls. So we really put our energy level to where the facilities are prioritized for their maintenance, and when we are short-staffed, the high priority facilities get the attention, and then we work our way to those that aren't as high a priority.
Thank you. So also the question, and I know that Ms. Adie indicated that you weren't going to talk about weed abatement in this particular presentation. However, I mean, we're going into the season now where weed abatement is going to be absolutely critical in our county. Do we have the proper amount of staff to accomplish those tasks?
Scott Morgan, Community Services Director, Mr. Chair. We do not. Our seasonal positions, we only have one filled at this point in time. That's why we had a supplemental request in to eliminate 3, because we have been successful recruiting full-time staff members. And even though not having 3 seasonals is going to affect our service level, having one more full-time person that's adequately trained and that can hit the ground rolling rather than the learning curve of bringing on new seasonals, training them, because they all have to receive some level of chemical application training before they can go out on the road, would be a benefit to it. But the short answer is no. We do not have the staffing level to adequately meet the demand that we're going to see this spring. We're already establishing waiting lists. We have a prioritization to make sure we take care of our ag properties first before we take care of residential properties, and chemical is flying out the door with sales because people are preparing for what they think is going to be a pretty aggressive weed season.
Sorry to interrupt, but go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Brooke Adie again. So overall, here are some key changes from our base budget to our proposed budget. You'll see where we were before, during, and after COVID. Many of our expense slides do show a trend over time. As a department, we're still trying to recover from COVID. So the proposed budget is based off of the 2021 budget, where our expenses were much lower. Terry alluded to a lot of this yesterday, where there were some increases that were given as a result of this. We're still trying to recover from staff shortages. I was here a couple weeks ago talking about some of our staffing issues. During COVID, we furloughed 22 people and we froze 17 positions. We are working to get those hired again, but we are running into some struggles. As a result of the reduction, we had to really reduce our kids clubs programs. They were the most negatively impacted. Prior to COVID, we were set up at 6 schools. Now we're only at 3. We're having to bus kids in a van from one school to the next, which really limits our capacity. Our goal is to get that program fully functioning, maximize its capacity, be present at all of the schools, not only so our kids have a safe place to go before and after school, but allowing our parents an opportunity to get back into the workforce. This is really a jobs program. Having your children be at a safe place where they can be watched before and after school really allows them to get back to work. Again, our Topaz Lake Campground showed record use. We had lots of people utilizing that facility during that time. And then also, many of our major maintenance and repairs projects were put on hold since we were not sure what the room tax was going to do. So we would really like to get back to where we're able to address our major maintenance and repairs. The parks were heavily used as more people were outside. Our park staff worked very hard to keep up the curb appeal while so many people were using the facility. And overall, our goal is to keep our parks and facilities operating at the highest level, staying on top of maintenance and repairs. Since the room tax is looking good, now's the time to restore some of our operations. We'll not be going through all of the expense slides. However, if you have any questions, please let me know. In the slides, we do highlight in green where the expenses were much lower than what they have been previously and what we're asking for, and there are explanations as to why, most of it as a result of COVID. So I'm going to hand this one over to Scott.
Scott Morgan, Community Services Director, Mr. Chair, and members of the board. We wanted to take on a little bit and talk a little bit about the administrative costs associated with the room tax fund. And there's $607,000 budgeted in there. Of that includes $444,000 in cost allocation. And just as the room tax fund gets reimbursed from the general fund for the services it provides, this is a reimbursement back to the general fund for the services it provides, the room tax fund. Things like human resources, the finance department, clerk treasurer, the county manager's office, all those departments within the general fund that support the room tax fund. We reimburse through the cost allocation program an assessed value as performed by the cost allocation report, a private company that prepares those figures. So a majority of that cost resides in this administrative cost. There also contained in this line item is the company HDL that has just done a really outstanding job for Douglas County in collecting room tax. They also do a lot of compliance with the vacation rentals, and they ensure that we are getting the proper amount of funds from either the commercial hotel properties and our vacation home rentals, though they are important to the compliance. We also do a $255,000 transfer out. Of that includes $80,000 of room taxes to help pay for debt service associated with the community and senior center, $75,000 transfer to economic vitality. Part of the TLLT, or the Transient Lodgers License Tax, includes an economic vitality component. And so we help support through this transfer the Economic Vitality Managers Department, as well as you're going to see in our supplemental request, we have some what are non-traditional room tax supplemental requests that have to do with economic vitality. And so it is appropriate to fund those from the room tax fund for economic vitality. We also transfer out $100,000 from the utility operator fee, the half cent that is collected for the operation of the community center. $100,000 of roughly that $400,000 goes to the senior fund to pay for utilities and their costs associated with being in the community and senior center. It also used to include $50,000 for meeting space up at the Tahoe Transportation Building, which has since been eliminated. So we did highlight that in red based on an action taken by the County Board of Commissioners.
Brooke 80, Assistant Director again. We're going to go through many slides that show our expenses. This is where our promotional expenses break down and what we have had in previous years and what our proposed budget is for this year. This is used for state promotion, Douglas County promotion, the Convention Center, Douglas County Roads, and the Tahoe Transportation District. Here's a breakdown of our parks operation expenses, salaries and wages, benefits, services and supplies. Here we show our capital improvement projects, which will be talked about later, I believe, in April. Here they are listed with the dollar amounts that we have put in the CIP. These projects have been before the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, the Senior and Transportation Advisory Board twice each, so they have been presented and approved by both boards. As we go through the next slide, here are temporary
I'm
and
sorry,
seasonal.
can we go back
Yep.
one slide?
Yep.
So I see that there's nothing in the proposed budget for capital improvement for 2023. Is that correct?
Scott Morgan, Community Services Director, Mr. Chair. That is correct. That is going to be scheduled as a special meeting, we believe in the first week in April, potentially to talk specifically about capital projects. So you will have the opportunity to make those determinations and allocate those resources for the various projects that the department will be putting forward. So this is just to show that it doesn't mean that zero is the dollar amount. We do plan a separate meeting just to talk about capital projects.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to go back real quick on that one, that's all. Did you have something to share with us?
Terry Willoughby for the record. We'll be bringing that, we talked about that yesterday. We're going to bring the American Rescue Plan Act fund requests and the capital improvement program back together. It will not be on the April 7th meeting. I would expect mid-April.
Thank you for the clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke 80 again. Here are our temporary and seasonal expenses, salaries and wages. Next slide, please. Our additional recreation expenses. Our recreation temporary and seasonal expenses. Kale Community Center expenses. Our Valley Gym and Fitness expenses. Our community meeting room expenses, our Valley expenses. And here is our supplemental request. I believe those will be discussed later today. They have also not been included in the budget, but here is just a summary of what we have put forward as our supplemental requests for equipment and maintenance projects.
Scott Morgan, Community Services Director for Douglas County, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Also, some of these major maintenance and repairs come out of our public planning sessions with our advisory boards, things such as the Dangberg Home Ranch. We've taken a lot of public comment regarding the need for ongoing maintenance at our historic ranch facility. Other than some of the equipment purchases, the things that are major maintenance and repair like tennis courts are also publicly heard through our advisory boards.
Brooke 80 again. Here are some projects that our Douglas County Parks that the Parks Department has been up to. So we've talked a lot about budget, and we really wanted to take an opportunity to show you pictures and really highlight all of the wonderful things that they've done over the last year. So here are some pictures of the Topaz Breakwater that they've been working on. It's quite an interesting project. Next slide. Brodovich Dog Park. They've installed a dog park up at Brodovich Park. A new well at the Daneberg Home Ranch. You're going really. A new swing set at the Johnson Lane Park. There were some renovations done to Lampe Park, some on the baseball fields, and then also, I don't know if any of you guys have been to the park recently, but there are new pathway lights all along the park. A new walking path at the Montera subdivision. New light meters at both Sodic and Aspen Park for the ball fields. Installing new fiber for the shooting range surveillance system. That's been quite a big project. New pavers at Sodic Park on all of the walking paths. They look very nice. And then here are some recreation events. Some of the events were ones that we had prior to COVID, some were during COVID, and then some we would like to restore, but we really wanted to highlight all of the fun things that are happening at the facility. The Douglas County Community and Senior Center is really a wellness hub. It's a hub for community events. It's a hub for emergency events. It really is a central point in our community. So here are some of the things that we've done there. During COVID, we really had to adapt a lot of the community center activities, so a lot of drive-through holidays happened. So here's some pictures of our drive-through holidays that we're passing out food. We became an evacuation center during the fire. Staff worked really hard, really long hours, being available to put together food, to bring in donations, to just be there as a support for people who were evacuated from their homes. Our youth sports programs are up and running again, and we're increasing capacity, and the kids are having a lot of fun. It's really great to be there and see everybody out and about and participating in activities. We have flag football, basketball, volleyball, lots of youth sports. Adult sports also, we're getting back into doing adult sports. We have adult volleyball, softball, flag football. I saw them playing flag football on Sunday at the park. Our rock wall, so while we were closed during the pandemic, they were able to finish and complete the rock wall. So the picture on the left is an adaptive rock wall class that we do. So for kids with disabilities are able to participate in the rock wall. So that has been quite a welcoming new event that we have at the community center, and the kids are really starting to enjoy it, and use is really increasing. And our father-daughter dance happened again this year, so this is the one on the left, and then our GE concerts in the park. And here's our impact report. So it's a program breakdown of the number of kids that were able to receive scholarships for the facility, funded through our Incredible Kids program. You'll see in the yellow are all the different programs that we are able to do, and then some fun pictures of all the kids participating. So 422 kids were able to receive scholarships to be able to use the facility, and so we really wanted to highlight that. Okay, so now we're moving on to social services. Within social services are indigent services, social services, the community health clinic, and the adult day club. Yeah. Oh, sorry, any questions about room tax, parks, recreation? Okay. So here are our revenue sources. So we have a dedicated tax, charges for services, inter-fund transfers, intergovernment transfers, and then miscellaneous funds. Okay. There are funds under social services 216, which is the general budget, and then 215, which is the supplemental budget. I'm going to turn this over to Scott to talk more about the NRS that guides these funding streams.
Scott Morgan, Community Services Director. The Social Services Fund has always been one that has got people scratching their head a little bit why it sits in community services. And I think the Senior Center makes a lot of sense, but we get a lot of questions about why we are the ones in charge of this particular fund. And I think as we go through this slide, it's going to make a lot of sense, what we're doing and why we're doing it. Because social services has changed quite a bit over the years. Back before we had the Health Care and Reform Act, Obamacare, the supplemental fund or the 215 fund paid for just long-term care and medical expenses, primarily to set up to save rural hospitals and urban hospitals in communities because of the demand of uninsured people in those facilities burdening the emergency rooms. Those expenses were primarily funded from the 215 fund, which was at one time called the supplemental fund. It was also called the 6 to 10 cent fund because it allows the county commissioners to tax up to 10 cents on property taxes to help pay for some of these costs. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a future slide. The 216 fund is odd because they both under NRS say the county shall. And a lot of people have interpreted that the first dollar you take in shall go to pay for your indigents. So these two funds, both having their separate tax rates on the tax bill, pay for indigent services in Douglas County. Once Obamacare came into effect, it virtually eliminated the cost for medical services in Douglas County because theoretically everyone had insurance. It was as a result of that you'll see in a future slide that Douglas County reduced its tax rate, shifted some of that money to roads in order to stop what was causing a very large fund balance between these two funds. And so we'll talk a little bit about the planned expenditure or reduction in fund balance in these funds that we have been in for a number of years. The important thing about the 216 fund, and that's why you'll see all the expenses from the health clinic to the adult daycare, to general social services, all residing in the 216 fund. And we do that simply because state law says that the 216 fund or general services must go up by state law 4.5%. So we put all those services just because of cost of personnel. We're able to meet that state requirement. Because of just general inflation and staffing causes, we are able to comply with state law without having to build or enhance new program. We run a very conservative social services department in Douglas County, but we're also very compassionate as well. Getting people back to work, preventing teen pregnancies, or any unwanted pregnancy, keeping people healthy and immunized in Douglas County are all priorities of this department. And so we're pretty proud of the services that we do, but those are some of the distinctions between the two funds. This is impossible to read, and we know that, but it does show the area that is highlighted in yellow. That is the area where we were once at 10 cents, reduced actually down to 5.25 cents, are not currently up to 6 cents. And we talk about this because there was a time where we were reducing reserves to the point where we thought in a couple of years we would have to go back and increase the tax rate. We are also very pleased to see that we are probably 3 or 4 years again before we start having that discussion about protecting those social services. We're able to operate off fund balance throughout probably the next several years in accordance to our current operating systems. And you can see there are actually 3 highlighted in red. And again, I know they're difficult to read. There's also a state medical accident fund. And that was primarily set up as it's a special tax rate throughout the state of Nevada. Is a pass-through tax rate that goes directly to the state of Nevada to pay for uninsured pedestrians that got hit crossing the strip in Vegas. People that were out of state, and there was a fund established. And again, back when we had the Health Care and Reform Act pass, there was no need for that fund. The state is still collecting it, and right now NACO administers it, and they use it as an emergency fund to help counties pay for extra long-term care cost. Oops. Guess I really hit the wrong button there. These are some of the expenses within those funds, and if you have questions, we're happy to answer those. But I do want to get to this particular slide, which talks about, and I'll go back to that. Where's our budget killer? Well, I'm going to skip ahead to that. Long-term care cost. Bankrupted White Pine County several years ago, if you remember hearing about White Pine County going under state receivership. And the reason it did was long-term care costs. Back when gold prices took a nosedive and able-bodied folks left the county, it left only those indigent and those that were sitting in long-term care facilities, bankrupted the county. As a result, the state of Nevada put in this emergency fund that we talked about, the State Medical Indigent Fund, and they use it now as an insurance policy for counties that exceed their 8-cent cap on their property taxes. For long-term care. Carson City routinely does that, as evident by this slide. And if you exceed your cost, or what 8 cents generates in your community, the state will come in and pay the balance. As you can see by this particular slide, Douglas County is not. And this is where everything really comes together. This is something I am most proud of out of almost everything I've done. Putting things together and handling and managing long-term care costs has been a priority between social services, senior services, DART transportation, our recreation program, and our adult daycare. We have taken a bite out of our long-term care. It is not by accident. This is literally the difference in millions of dollars annually compared to like counties with even a smaller senior population. Douglas County is managing its long-term care costs highly effectively. The state of Nevada, for this particular budget year, has set if we were collecting 8 cents in our supplemental fund, has set our insurance cap at $1.8 million. We're not even being billed for $500,000. We are under that. This alone, these cost savings, will not only pay for every program that we are running, but will pay for the cost of this building over the next 10 years just in tax dollar savings. This is real money. This is why our taxes are allowed to be very, very low in Douglas County. It's why we're allowed to shift some of these tax dollars to the road department to pay for county roads. And this is a significant value to Douglas County. And it is a coordinated approach that we started even before the new building was being built, in plans to make sure people could stay independent in our community, that our seniors, if they needed a ride to get groceries, if they needed a ride to go to the doctor, when they no longer can drive, we're going to make sure that happens. And that happens through our DART transportation. And if somebody needs a little help at hand with long-term care, we implemented the adult daycare program. So a spouse or a child caregiver can continue to provide that service to a loved one rather than being exhausted and sending them to the nursing home. And even if you have resources, it does not take long at $7,000 to $8,000 a month to blow through your savings, to take the equity out of your home, and then end up living your golden years in an institution and being a burden on the public funds, being paid for through indigent funds and this program. We have two approaches when we talk to folks. One, if we're talking to the fiscally conservative, that there's great value in this. And if we're talking to those that care about our seniors and our residents, this is the way you should live out your golden years. In your own home, volunteering at your church, paying your taxes, hanging out with your friends, and living in that lifestyle adds to the quality of life. Truly, it makes Douglas County special because we're able to head these expenses off. There are no guarantees with this, but there is an established track record of savings that has come down the pike as a result of the approach we have taken in managing our long-term care costs. These are costs, again, that can careen out of control. You can see the volatility in Lyon County where it's gone up and down, but that's a significant amount of money. Almost $1.3 million annually going to long-term care in Lyon County, and they are a receiver. They are a granted county. Every year they have to go to the state of Nevada and get bailed out by their fund from what used to be the motor vehicle accident fund to help support their county. And so we're really pleased that Douglas County has managed this fund in this manner, and here truly is where a lot of savings reside. Before I go back, are there any questions regarding long-term care cost? I think we already kind of went over those. We do have a supplemental request. I'll turn it back over to Ms. Adie.
Thank you, Brooke 80 again. So there's only one supplemental request for the social services budget, and which you will also be hearing about later, but this is for some building repairs and improvements. Okay, any questions about social services before we move on to senior services? Okay. So here are the programs that are under our senior services funds. We have the transportation, which Scott was talking about, congregate dining, both at our facility in South County and North County, Meals on Wheels, and our Homemaker program. Here are our revenue sources for our senior services. So we have intergovernmental grants, charges for services, some miscellaneous and donations, and then some other transfers in. Here is another review of the transfer in. So previously, when I had talked about the utility operator fee and the PALS tax, here's where you see where they fit within our budget. Here is our historical amounts for our transfer in from the general fund. As you can see, these funds are used to balance our budget, and they provide critical services to seniors, one of which is our adult day club, which Scott was talking about, also our congregate dining programs. And as you can see, over the last 10 years, there has been minimal increase in our general fund transfer amounts. Go ahead. Oh, you want to? Go.
Scott Morgan, Community Services Director for Douglas County. The transfer in serves a couple of vital roles. One, it balances the budget, and it also provides a lot of support for the grants that we incur. And if you look back on some of the revenue slides, both social services and the senior center are heavily reliant upon operating grants. Grants that pay for operational programs such as DART transportation, congregate meals, Meals on Wheels, and the Homemaker program. And so when we set aside and we apply for a grant, many of them are 2-year grants. They call it a match, and you get to approve these pretty frequently when we do apply and accept these grant funds. But we don't actually cash match these grants. They pay for services. For example, some of the programs in DART transportation are 80% funded. For example, 80% of a driver's salary would be funded through the grant. The county picks up the other 20%. So when cash sits in there, the match is really residing in a line item expenditure and not as cash. We never give cash to the state. Our match is in the form of matching expenditures. So those grant matches are contained within the line item service budget of both the senior as well as the social services program. And the general fund just balances the budget through their transfer in to support these programs and the grant funded programs established through the senior and social services.
Brooke 80 again. Here are our senior services expenses, salaries and wages, services and supplies. You'll see again the green highlighted areas. Go ahead, you're good. Scott went over those. So let's take a minute to highlight some of our activities that we have happening in our senior programs. Here's some pictures of our congregate dining. We have many social events at the facility. So we have field trips. This one is at Aces Park. the baseball game. We've had cookie decorating. We've had the Comstock Cowboys come. We have painting classes, ceramics classes. Our senior games is an activity that we were hoping to restore. So here's some pictures of our senior games, which was very popular. And that is it. Any questions?
Can we get the lights back on, maybe? Thank you. Mr. Ingles, did I see your hand up?
Is there a minimum age that is required before somebody enters into these programs? And what is the average age? Thank you.
Scott Morgan, Community Services Director. The minimum age to qualify as a senior in Douglas County is 60 years old, but everyone is welcome. It just determines how you are handled when you come into the door. If you are over the age of 60 or a disabled individual, you pay a suggested donation for lunch and the Meals on Wheels program. If you are under 60 and able-bodied, there's a $7 charge to participate in lunch. For the social programs or activities, they are open to anyone and everyone. Some of them have a charge. Some of them are supported by Young at Heart, the senior citizens club that supports those activities is free. Throughout the facility, the average age of our senior is starting to change. We were right around 70 at one point in time, maybe a little higher back when the old senior center was opened, but we are seeing that age go down on average by membership and by use because we're attracting our goal, a younger market, getting them active, getting them out of the house. Not just keeping them physically active, but the goal is socialization. We find that most of our seniors, averaging around 67, coming in and using our programs, don't necessarily always need the nutrition, although good nutrition is sound for good health. But a reason to get up in the morning is the single biggest purpose for that building. Having friends, feeling plugged into their community, volunteering. There are also, many of them are volunteers giving their time to the facility. And so we have created an atmosphere that we want to be able to morph into the baby boomer population as they age. I'm a boomer. I never see myself ever going to the senior center. I'll go to that community center though, and maybe I'll have lunch. And maybe I'll do some exercise classes, but I'll be gall darned if I'm gonna just sit in a government subsidized program. But I'll have lunch with my friends there, and I'll maybe play some cards. And so that is the atmosphere that we have created in that facility. And I tell everyone that I think in 10 years we'll be chiseling the name Senior Center off that building. And it'll just be your community center. And we'll still do those services to keep people independent, to keep people in their own homes, but we may just call it something different.
Thank you, Scott. This area is pretty amazing because I've never seen so many active, I mean really active, seniors. They're not sitting around letting the grass grow underneath there. They're out screwing around doing something. And this is all part of it. And by keeping them active, that helps to, let's look at the economics, keep costs down. Because there's the mental considerations, the physical considerations, and the spiritual considerations. And so, good work. Thank you.
Commissioners, any questions?
What a great job you guys do. Just great job.
So I just had a couple of questions. I know that our meal service for our seniors was really light during COVID. We've probably obviously seen an uptick in that. How many meals do you serve on a daily basis, average?
Scott Morgan, Community Services Director. We see on average about 150. We have peak days that go about 250, and on Fish Fridays or when we have to do a state menu, we can get down around 100. So the averages are really based on menu or also activity. Bingo days, ice cream days, our stretch and tone and walking program keeps a consistent bunch of folks in the building, but it is truly the social activities that drive, and the menu that drive the attendance at the center. And again, I've said this on many occasions, our goal is not to feed every senior in the county. Our goal is to reach those that need the help, and the less help we can provide, the better. And we used to, before COVID, we used to give you door counts and meal averages. Those all got thrown out the window over the last 2 years. I don't have any great data that means anything. But I remember talking to our cook one day, and we had a year where we served less meals. That's okay. In fact, that's great. More people are independent, more people are healthy enough where that's okay. We don't have to do that. Are we getting to everyone that needs nutrition? We believe we are. But we don't have to serve everyone. I'd like to see the door count for fitness classes and social activities stay strong, which it has. Those things mean something. But making sure we're making ourselves available is really the most important. And then the proof is in just one simple slide, that long-term care cost. The state qualifies them. We don't have any control over it. We don't get to say yay or nay or no or yes. We just get the bill. And we get the bill from the state for a Douglas County resident for 50%. The state pays the other 50%. So we are constantly looking at data, and we're constantly looking at ways to enhance and improve and bring that number down or keep it under control.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. I know that we serve meals at the senior center on a daily basis. We also transport meals down to Topaz Ranch Estates Community Center 3 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, and up to Indian Hills on Friday or Wednesday and Friday. Is that correct? Is there any anticipation of perhaps expanding that to those two satellite dining areas?
Scott Morgan, Community Services Director. Yes, there is. We have those discussions at our advisory board level frequently. One, we think there is probably demand to have 5-day service at both locations. The numbers continue to grow, and those groups are bound. Not only, again, are they getting a nutritious meal, but it is that social component, that building neighborhood that I think has really caused those groups to grow. They really like coming together as their community. And many of them can drive to the community center, but it's important that they dine with their neighbors and their friends. And that's where we've seen the strength of that program grow. And so we believe in years we would like to enhance that program and encourage that involvement. There is a cost associated with it, and of course we're sensitive to that as well. But there may be an opportunity in future years to expand those programs and come back to this board and talk about enhancing the budget to support those. There's also been talk about going to a part-time service up at the lake, where we feel in our senior population, more than anything, they've lost that sense of community. They've lost that ability to get out. We provide transit services, and there's a club that provides activities, social activities up at the lake. But we think building strength and community amongst our disabled and senior populations through a nutrition program would be a plus to our community.
Our community doesn't appear to be getting any younger. Just an observation, you know.
Ain't that the truth?
But I feel like we probably are underserviced, especially in the Indian Hills area, Mr. Noah said, you know. So I think it's important to expand it up there, and I know that we would appreciate it from talking with residents down in the Topaz Ranch area as well. We had a supplement or a budget request in regards to vehicles. Would that, is that part of the process, is not having enough vehicles? So.
Scott Morgan, Community Services Director. Most of that would be, we do have 2 Meals on Wheels vehicles, so we could sustain that delivery. There would probably be a need for 1 vehicle, but it's really a staffing issue. It's mostly run by volunteers, but we do have 1 county paid staff that drives the vehicle, delivers the food, and right now that same person goes to north and south. So if we went to 5-day-a-week service, it would require 1 additional staff and, of course, a food budget to support the additional cost of providing nutrition at those locations.
Are those volunteers that drive those buses, or is it staff that, paid staff that does that?
Scott Morgan, they are paid staff that drives the vehicles out and handles the food. Then they turn it over to trained volunteers to actually serve the food and clean up. But then they drive the dishes and the materials back, a paid staff member.
Thank you. So the other question I had was regarding the community center and Sundays. I believe that we're at, from my understanding, we're at 6 days, not 7 days. Is that a staffing issue also, or what is the anticipation of trying to get our community center back open on Sundays, I guess?
Scott Morgan, we would like to be back open on Sundays. It is definitely 100% a staffing issue. We've tried to throw all our resources at restoring Kids Club and Adventure Camp hours because how critical that is to jobs in our community. The community center has also we've been more successfully recruited. We've just expanded hours later into the evening as a result of some of the actions taken by this board and the creative nature of our human resources and county manager's office that have allowed us to recruit. We are on the verge of opening back up on Sundays, and we hope to make that announcement shortly once we get staffed up.
So do you anticipate the actions this board took yesterday in regards to salaries and compensation to be a benefit to you on that regard?
Scott Morgan, yes, 100%. Those are very positive and aggressive actions to meet the staff shortages in Douglas County. So thank you very much for that.
And as I understand it, those processes would also, by having that staff and being able to open, it's also a revenue source as well. Is that right? So it's not a cost to us, really. It's actually a benefit to bring more revenue in for those activities.
Yes, Sundays are not the biggest days. They are more family days where people come in. So we don't have a lot of program taking place on Sundays. It's program that drives membership at the community center. And the last time we did a cost recovery analysis pre-COVID, the gymnasium portion was 100% of its direct cost recovered through fees and charges and programs. So restoring program and building membership will also drive greater attendance on Sunday. And we'll sell more memberships as well as being able to have a fitness facility open 7 days a week when a lot of people want to work out on Sundays. It's their only day off. It's their only chance to do that. And unfortunately, we've been closed and not able to respond to that need.
Thank you. I think we're all anxious, especially Mr. Tarkanian is anxious for that to happen, right?
I just wanted to mention, making the revenues all good and well, but providing the services of the community center, particularly with all the capital improvements, that cost that went into it. Having a young child and he going to school in Carson City at the St. Teresa, he doesn't get back until by the time you guys start activities during the week. You know, it's you guys start between 4 and 5, so we can't use a community center with him. What if I want to take him to go play ball? Saturday and Sunday is only 2 days, and when you don't have it open for Sunday, you take away 50% of the opportunity I can spend with my son. And I'm not the only one. There's a lot of people like us, and so I think the Sunday opening is very important, as I've mentioned to you before.
Thank you. Commissioners, any other questions? Mr. Nosad, Mr. Ingles, Mr. Rice? Okay. Thank you very much. Very comprehensive report. We appreciate your coming forward and doing this and taking our questions. So we appreciate your activity today. I would sense, well, I'm sensing that I need a break. So can we take a break until, let's say, 10:25? Would that be good? 10:25, we'll resume. Thank you.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
If everybody could resume their seats, I'd appreciate it. We can get restarted on this. It's 10:21. All 5 commissioners are back in chambers, so we'll begin. And we're going to item number 1 on the agenda for possible action, discussion to approve the fiscal year 2022-23 tentative budgets for all Douglas County and Douglas County redevelopment agency funds. Discussion may include a general overview of the Douglas County budget, including but not limited to presentations on the following: general fund, all departments including supplemental requests, special revenue funds including supplemental requests, debt service funds, enterprise funds including supplemental requests, internal service funds including supplemental requests, capital projects funds including supplemental requests, and redevelopment agency funds. This is being presented by our Chief Financial Officer, Ms. Willoughby, and from our Finance Department, Ms. Cartwright. Is that right? Thank you. And for purposes, do we know which tab we're on right now then?
We are on tab 3 in the
Tab 3.
binders. And
Okay.
what's the packet page? And packet page 126 for the reference.
It's one of 126. They're all.
I know, but they're at home.
It's a pretty hefty tab, huh? Although last year, I think it had a whole budget, a whole binder by itself, so.
So Terry Willoughby for the record, and I'm just going to give a brief introduction, reminder of what a special revenue fund is, because we know in finance, but the regular people probably don't understand that. And I gave you a handout. It's from Investopedia, and I put that on, gave it to the clerk as well. A special revenue fund is an account established by the government to collect money for a specific purpose, and we do this for transparency so that we don't commingle money that has, if it has a specific purpose, it's segregated into a separate fund and tracked separately. For example, many of the funds that Mr. Morgan was referring to, the room tax fund, senior services fund, those are specific funding sources that are identified, like PAL sales tax is identified as a funding source for senior services. We don't want to mix it up with the general fund. We want to make sure that that people understand that this money can only be used for this, and the county is appropriately only using it for that, and that's why it's tracked separately. And a reminder, we do have one special revenue fund, the WINRIC Fund, Western Nevada Regional Youth Correctional Center, that was eliminated this year by board action and rolled into the general fund. With that, I'll turn it over to Jenny Cartwright, and she will go through the details.
Jenny Cartwright, Finance Manager. So we are on tab 3, looking at the Special Revenue Fund tentative budget. And also the summary on page 4 of 8 that was put in the front of your binders yesterday. And I believe that is posted as a supplemental item for those following along at home. So starting out, we have the Nevada Cooperative Extension. This fund has an overall 6% decrease in expenditures in the fiscal year 23 tentative budget, partly because of the transfer of a position from county position to professional services. The activities of this fund are supported by University of Nevada, Reno. I wasn't going to go through the details of we're going to do a page turn, but please feel free to stop me at any point if you have questions as we go along. I was going to go fund by fund and just kind of give the overview, but similarly to yesterday, there are line item details in every budget that's in front of you in your book in tab 3. So feel free to stop me at any point. The Solid Waste Management Fund has an overall 4% increase, which was within that 5% that we budgeted for services and supplies. You'll notice that there is a joint powers of agreement line item that we tend not to use, we're happy about that. It's part of an agreement for the landfill in Tahoe, but only if needed. The Fund 212 is the Landscape Maintenance District. Currently, it only has the Montera neighborhood in it. So it's a relatively small fund, and revenue is provided by the residents of that lit neighborhood. Fund 215 is Assistance to Indigents, and it is a collection fund, essentially, for distributions to support the activities of the Public Guardian, Social Services, and Senior Services in providing services to indigent residents of the county. The transfer has increased because the activities of those departments in relation to indigent services has increased in the proposed budget. Thanks to Scott Morgan and Brooke 80 for the extensive coverage of social services, senior services, and the room tax fund. I won't go into great detail about those three funds. You've heard some details on those this morning. The next fund is social services, which has 4 different divisions within it.
So if I could just interrupt you for just a second. Commissioners, please don't wait for me to acknowledge you. If you have questions, please go ahead and ask them as we go through this, okay? Thank you, Ms. Cartwright.
Thanks. So following social services is the PAL Sales Tax Fund, which was also covered in this morning's presentation. It is another collection fund for distribution to parks, library, and senior services. So essentially, everything that's collected in that fund is transferred out for the support of those 3 programs. Next is the law library.
Excuse me, for those that don't know, would you explain what PALS is for?
Jenny Cartwright. It stands for Parks, Airport, Library, and Senior Services. However, as mentioned, because the airport is now self-supporting and is an enterprise fund, which operates more like a business, it's the revenue in this fund supports the parks, library, and senior services.
You needed the airport in there to have an acronym, right?
And Terry will be for the record, the proportion of percentages of distribution were actually sent by the board in a resolution, I believe, in 2019.
Next up is the law library, which has an increase over the fiscal year 21 actuals, primarily because we added a contingency to this fund in the fiscal year 23 budget. Next up is the road operating fund. This fund does a lot of maintenance and operations for roads in our area, and you'll notice that the increase is 6%, which is very close to the 5% that we added to the overall services and supplies category in the current year. Following that, we have the room tax fund, which again, we had an extensive presentation on this morning. Just to point out again, the primary differences in the increases in this fund are due to the suppression of spending during fiscal year 21 when we were under COVID protocols, staffing furloughs, vacancies, and some reimbursements from the CARES Act money, which showed as a credit against those fiscal year 21 actual expenditures, making these the actuals low compared to the budget this year. So it really represents a restoration of the programs that were eliminated or cut back during COVID. Next is, so that you'll notice there's nothing in the library gift fund. That is a restricted fund. which we don't include in the operating budget. The Tahoe Transportation District, Fund 236, does not currently have capital improvement projects in it. So you'll notice that the request is 67% below the fiscal year 21 actuals. Once we bring the capital improvement program back to this board for consideration in April, we'll be adding those projects into the budget, and you'll see some changes in that for the final budget. Fund 240 is the Justice Court admin assessments. Again, these are restricted funds, so there is not anything currently in the operating budget for those funds. There is a separate process for augmenting the spending of restricted funds, so they're not included in today's budget. Fund 242, China Spring Youth Camp. Do you want to talk about that? I'll hand it over to Terry Willoughby for this.
Terry Willoughby for the record. Yes, we are still working with the other counties to determine the contributions to China Spring. I expect similar to last year, we'll bring back a revised budget for China Spring after budget adoption. So when the revenue's clear. They did experience another cut from the state, but I believe that Mr. Cates is working with NACO, and there's a special committee on trying to restore some of that funding. So hopefully we'll be bringing that back after budget adoption.
So I was going to ask Mr. Cates for kind of an updated, was anticipating that question.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we continue to work with the China Spring Youth Camp Working Group. The conversation that we're having right now is requesting that the counties fund the additional cut from the state. The state cut doubles in the next fiscal year compared to what it was this year. And what we're asking for is for counties to contribute that difference so that they can maintain operations as they have it this year, which is limited, but they're making do with what they have, with a strategy to go back to the legislature next session to ask them to restore the state funding.
Okay. I know that last year, during this year, we supplemented that budget by our county by around $95,000. Are we anticipating that same type of expenditure this year, or smaller, lower, or increased?
For the record, Patrick Cates, it is not included in this tentative budget that you are seeing, but yes, I do anticipate that there would be a request to fund a similar amount for next fiscal year.
So, of course, trying to restore that funding on a statewide level would be really dependent upon whether or not we have a governor that is willing to take a look at that as well. Would that be a good assessment? So hopefully we'll have a governor that will be in the next legislative session conducive to restoring some of that funding. So.
And Terry Willoughby for the record, we have, even though we made the initial contribution this year, other counties have not made their initial contribution. So we would want to try and recoup their contribution as well as before we make another contribution.
Last year, November 4, we had a presentation by the USGS in regard to nitrate buildup in the valley because of septic tanks not being properly maintained for whatever reason. And this is creating nitrate plumes. We're headed towards various aquifers. Now, it's become extraordinarily expensive to have a septic tank pumped and maintained. If the county had a program where, for whatever reason, the person is indigent or can't afford it, and the septic tank needs to be pumped, would it fall into this solid waste category?
Terry Willoughby, I would have to review the finance agreement. There's a franchise agreement that governs this particular fund, so we would need to look at that and then also bring back a funding plan over extensive, that's an extensive project that would require more research.
What do you just think, kind of off the top of your head?
Terry Willoughby, for the record, I have not reviewed the franchise agreement on this recently, so I don't want to speculate. But I'd be happy to look at it.
Thank you.
I think that's a good observation, Mr. Ingles. Thank you. Ms. Cartwright?
So next, we have the Stormwater Fund 245, which, as mentioned yesterday, is primarily funded by a transfer, well, it is entirely funded right now by a transfer from the general fund. It does have a 17% increase over fiscal year 21 actuals, primarily because of staff vacancies, adding a contingency where there wasn't one before, and then also an increase in the general fund and risk management cost allocations and vehicle maintenance. So really just an increase in overall activities in that fund and therefore, in turn, the amount of cost allocation that it pays.
And Terry Willoughby, for the record, that's a relatively new program. It was created in 2018, I believe. So that's why you're seeing the increased costs. It's just getting up to speed. Vehicles are now requiring more maintenance. They were new, now they're not. So just a little explanation and background.
Well, I can't help but notice that actually from the 22 budget to the 23 budget, we're looking at almost a $500,000 decrease, right?
Jenny Cartwright, for the record, yes, that's correct on a budgetary basis. Back to using actual numbers, that's what brings us back to our base budgeting methodology and looking at what that fund is actually spending versus what we're budgeting. And again, in cooperation with the department and what they feel they're going to need for the current year, you'll see those trends and adjustments as we go through different departments in the budget. Because we really try to base this on actual spending and projected need rather than carrying forward that budgeted amount from year to year.
Yeah, so that 16% is an increase over our actual expenditures from 21 to 23, not including what we budgeted in 22 that we did not spend. So I appreciate your activity in that regard. It's better to look at real numbers, so versus increasing amounts over and above what our budgeted was, but we didn't spend it. So, you know, we don't want to give anybody the impression that just because they were budgeted, they have to spend that money. Right?
Terry Willoughby, for the record, the funding for this, of course, as we keep saying, it does come from the general fund. The amount is set by resolution at $1,100,000. So that funding stays set whether or not they spend it until that resolution is revised.
All right, next up is the.
But that amount, excuse me, I'm sorry, Mr. Cartwright, but that amount was set because this was a new program and we were just trying to get it up and started and going. So we really didn't have really a good knowledge of what that program was going to cost us. Is that
Terry
right?
Willoughby, yes, that's correct. And it included amounts just to start up and purchase vehicles, and they're still starting up in some regards, so.
They do a tremendous program, so we're very fortunate to have them, and I'm glad that the board took the opportunity to start that up. So.
All right, next up is the Emergency Services 911 Fund 255, which is also closely related to the following Fund 256, which is the surcharge that's set aside for long-term replacement of equipment. So Fund 255 is the operating fund, And you'll notice that there is a 55% increase over fiscal year 21 actuals. This is primarily to do with staff vacancies making actuals low, some reimbursement of services and supplies from CARES Act funding, which again made the actuals appear lower than they really were. And then also restoring some travel to pre-COVID levels, which we'll start to see as a theme as we go through some of these budgets today. So, yeah, having briefly mentioned Fund 256, that's the surcharge. That has a 37% increase, primarily due to the movement of software program maintenance and cell phones from Fund 255. We did an evaluation of where those were best spent and most appropriately budgeted, so you'll see some movement there. And finally, for the special revenue funds, we have the senior services program, which was again presented to you this morning in detail, but just wanted to mention that we did add a contingency there in the senior services program, and they are restoring those programs back up to pre-COVID levels.
It's hard to look at this and because of COVID, these amounts seem astronomical increases, but, then we have to realize that we lost a lot because of COVID. So I know that we're anxious to get back to real numbers that we can, digest in a much better manner, so.
Yes, Jenny Cartwright for the record, and that did affect some programs more than others, particularly the ones in Mr. Morgan's area where there are a lot of external facing services. You'll notice that more than in others. So with the conclusion of the adjusted base budget, if there are no more questions, we can move on to the supplemental requests, which are in section 4.
I'm sorry, before we move into that, were there any other questions by the commissioners? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Jenny Cartwright for the record. So section 4 has one personnel-related supplemental request, which adds 0.7 of an FTE for the Senior Services Recreation Volunteer Coordinator. And the remainder of the requests are non-personnel related, and you'll notice that some, actually the majority of them are one-time costs for about $627,000, and then another approximately $180,000 of ongoing expenses, for a total of $806,000 in non-personnel related supplemental requests. Most of them are in community services and were covered in part this morning through the presentation. The only other one that would stand out would be the library materials of $104,000 that does not fall under community services, and also a small request from Stormwater for $5,000 for real property appraisal related to some activities in that fund. They're looking at evaluating that property while it might be available. I'm happy to answer any questions on the specifics.
So what I wanted to talk about is this position, and maybe Mr. Morgan or Ms. Adie can help us with this if I don't articulate this correctly. In regards to this volunteer coordinator, Senior Services Recreation Volunteer Coordinator, just so my fellow commissioners understand, we have probably the most, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Morgan, but we have the most community volunteers in our community services department, if I'm not mistaken. And we've gone completely online application process to become a volunteer within our county. And so what we're experiencing is that we have a tremendous amount of senior citizens who want to volunteer for our community services department, however, don't necessarily have the IT skills to go online and do that. So As I understand it, this position is to assist community services in making sure that all those folks have access to that volunteer application process and complete that in an appropriate manner so that we can get back to having the volunteer recruitments that we need for our departments. Is that a good analysis, Mr. Scott Morgan, or do you have some more to add to that?
Scott Morgan, Community Services Director for Douglas County. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, that is an excellent synopsis, not just from the recruitment and helping with the application process, but also to maintain a sustainability and as well as documentation. You're going to be seeing a new volunteer policy coming forward on April the 7th that I think takes some great steps in I guess, correcting some of the concerns within our volunteer program in Douglas County. Human Resources Department and the District Attorney's Office just did a really outstanding job preparing that document, which I believe will fundamentally change either the perception or the actuality of how we administer and handle volunteers within Douglas County. Having a volunteer coordinator and documenting hours and use and doing recognition and sustaining volunteers, and for whatever reasons they are volunteering, there are many that people choose to volunteer in Douglas County. And so a volunteer coordinator would recognize those skills, gifts, and recruit volunteers. We have a lot of people that I say we just sometimes miss the hook. They come in on the spur of the moment and they want to volunteer, and under the current system, without somebody there to hook them, we may lose them. Oh no, you got to go on the website, you got to go here, you got to, and it's like, well, I don't want to do that. I just want to volunteer. And so that just wanting to volunteer should be enough. We should do the rest and put them to work, contributing to our community. So we think this position has that ability to provide that extra enhanced service level.
Commissioners, any other questions?
I just had a simple question. All of these supplemental requests will be paid for through the special funds, not the general fund, correct?
Jenny Cartwright, yes, that's correct.
Chair, if I might add a comment about the volunteer coordinator.
Absolutely.
Terry Willoughby for the record. So one of the things we've been looking at is many grants have the opportunity to use, if you're using volunteers, you can use those volunteer hours as matching, as your matching contribution. So we are looking at ways to track the hours so we don't have cash out of hand. And so this volunteer coordinator would also be able to help with that.
Yep, I see that as an absolute. I'm surprised you can do it with a part-time employee. It's almost like when, the amount of volunteers, well over 300, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Morgan, right? Somewhere in that neighborhood. So, that seemed like a full-time job to me. But, if you think you can accomplish it with 3/4 of a person, I don't know if we have any 3/4 persons in our county, but.
Scott Morgan, Community Services Director. This was just a creative solution to potentially address some of the concerns that were raised in the community. And the reason 3/4 or 29-hour position was listed on the report was due to cost primarily. So we wanted to make sure if it had a chance, this would be its best chance.
Mr. Chairman.
Critical position, in my opinion, a critical position we need to help you in doing your job. So my question is, Ms. Willoughby, how quickly could we get this person into operation?
Terry Willoughby for the record. So it will be, the board's direction is to roll this position into the final budget, it would be approved sometime in May, and then they can start the recruitment process in May and have somebody on board in July 1st.
Okay, similar to the others that we approved yesterday, I guess, or looked at yesterday. Mr. Cates, you had comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I just, we've continued to look at this position, and I know it says 0.7 FTE, but if it goes forward, it really needs to be a full-time position, and we can correct that in the final documents.
Mr. Ingles.
This may be a little off topic, but has this situation with the background investigations for the volunteers been resolved?
Scott Morgan, Community Services Director. Mr. Chair, members of the board. It is about to. You're going to take a look at a new policy draft that'll come forward on April 7th that I believe resolves those concerns and streamlines a process.
Are there any other questions regarding the supplemental budget requests? Mr. Nosad? No? Rice? Nope. Okay. I guess we can, where are we headed now?
Jenny Cartwright, for the record. We are on tab number 5, which is the debt service funds tentative budgets. This fund is used to make repayments against our bonds. Not a lot of changes in the budget, except that we did have a capital lease that finished in fiscal year '21, so the budget went down slightly for the capital leases department, and everything else is fairly stable because our bond repayments remain stable.
And Terry Willoughby, for the record, this will change for final budget because we will close the refunding that was just approved by the board, and so we'll have those final numbers to roll into the final budget, so it will be reduced again.
Anticipated the question. Good job. Any questions, commissioners? Guess we can move, tab 6?
Jenny Cartwright, yes, tab 6. The enterprise funds tentative budgets, again, these are the funds that they aim to be self-supporting, and they operate more like a business where their revenue is recovered from the customers that they provide services to. So in the enterprise funds, we have water, sewer, and airport.
So Terry Willoughby, for the record, so they are actually required to set fees that will recover the majority of their costs. If they don't, then they are disqualified as being an enterprise fund.
Jenny Cartwright. And just a couple of things to point out with the changes from adjusted base. The regional water and sewer utilities are within a couple percent, 2 to 4% of their adjusted base budget. The Douglas County Water Utility Fund 328 includes maintenance and repair in the operating budget. That used to be something that was part of the CIP or special requests, but we're trying to get their regular maintenance and repairs as part of their baseline budget. And there's also an addition of $300,000 for some emergency leak repair contracts, which may or may not be used, but are currently budgeted, which reflects part of the 18% increase over base in that fund. And then the primary change for the airport is that the air show is back, yay. So those costs, Bobby's cheering. So those costs are increased in the, or shown in the operating budget. And then throughout the enterprise funds, we also have depreciation reflected in their expenses. There is an offset in revenue for depreciation. It's a little bit of an accounting entry more than a budgeting entry. So you'll see some increases reflected because of that.
I had one question.
Go ahead, Mr. Tartini.
So when these costs go up, is there an automatic increase in the fees to the consumers or the users?
Terry will be for the record, for water and sewer, there are rate studies, and that's probably happened before you came on the board, but they look out several years, and then they will reevaluate probably after 5 years of that rate study. And the airport does bring their rates to the board, and I'm sure that they look at their actual costs.
So we're on page 7 of this supplement, this other report you gave us, right? Okay, and then the details are in here. Okay.
Jenny Cartwright again, and the enterprise funds do have two supplemental requests that are in tab 7 of your binder. One related to a public works counter technician position, a request to add an FTE, and then a request for a truck for the airport. And the details of each supplemental is in the pages following the cover sheet in tab 7. Jenny Cartwright again, and much like the special revenue funds, these supplemental requests would be funded through the enterprise funds, so there is no additional burden to the general fund from these supplemental requests.
Anticipating Mr. Tarkadian's question, right?
So Terry Willoughby, for the record, I just confirmed one change we've made for the airport fund for fiscal year 22-23 is we brought it into the county's fleet services so that they have, they evaluate the vehicles that will help with the purchase of the supplemental request and perform routine maintenance on the vehicles and make sure that the maintenance is performed on the county standards.
Anybody else? We ready to move on? Okay.
Jenny Cartwright for the record. We are now on tab 8, which is the internal service funds adjusted base budget. And jumping around a little bit, we're on page 6 of 8 of the summary of base budget adjustments. At the bottom of page 6, you'll notice that in the risk management fund, there was approximately a $2 million accounting accrual reversal, which makes the fiscal year 2021 actuals sort of artificially lower. So if you bring that actual number up by $2 million, we're in line with the $3.9 million fiscal year 23 budget request. Sure.
Terry Willoughby, for the record, I wanted to explain a little bit about the actuarial study. So we are self-funded for workers' comp, which means we are responsible for the entire program. That change occurred in fiscal year 2018. We now perform a regular study of the claims and the liability so that we have an accurate picture, and we're recording that full future liability for our program. And that's the accounting adjustments you'll see.
And the next fund is Fund 310, the self-insured dental fund, which is within 6% of the base budget. So not a lot of specific changes are noted there. And then Fund 313 is our final internal services fund, and this is the motor pool fund, which is divided between the motor pool operations and then also vehicle maintenance. We have some, for comparison purposes, we had some motor vehicle expenses that were recorded as assets in fiscal year 21. So again, if you will increase that base year number by about $447,000, It makes us more on par with the 737,000 that's being requested this year. And we actually have a 28% decrease, given that accounting adjustment, because we're replacing less vehicles in this budget cycle than we were in the base budget cycle, the fiscal year 21 cycle.
Ms. Cartwright, does this include, are the sheriff's vehicles considered part of this, or are they're in the sheriff's budget?
Jenny Cartwright for the record. No, sir, the sheriff's vehicles are in the sheriff's department budget in the general fund. And then I just want to point out that in the vehicle maintenance fund, we did have some CARES Act reimbursements in fiscal year 21, so that base budget was sort of artificially low for comparison purposes. And we do not have any supplemental requests for the internal services fund this year.
And Terry, one thing I'd like to add is, right now, risk management has a variety of programs, has our self-funded workers' comp, liability and unemployment and administration, all are in risk management. My goal soon, hopefully, is to segregate our self-funded workers' comp into its own separate internal service fund for transparency. And that's something we're working on internally.
Commissioners? Okay, Mr. Ingles.
Just for clarification, I forget what it's called. In worker comp, there's a factor used to forecast or estimate what our worker comp costs are going to be. What is that term? I forget what it is.
Terry Willoughby, for the record, I can't remember either. I know it's in our IB. We have we actually have the actuary look at our actual claims and project those amounts. So I can bring that information tomorrow.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Cates?
I think the term you might be looking for is IBNR, incurred but not reported. Oh, I took a shot.
I can certainly provide copies of the last actuarial report. It's very exciting, but it will have all that information, and I'll bring that tomorrow.
Can we move on? Okay.
Jenny Cartwright for the record. We are on tab 9, the redevelopment agency tentative budget, which is summarized on page 8 of 8. There, in Fund 600, which is redevelopment area 2, this is a pass-through of collection of incremental property taxes to the Tahoe Douglas Visitors Authority. So any increase that you see in the expenditure line item in this budget is has a corresponding increase in the projected revenues that we will be receiving in that fund. And then the other change to note is that Fund 606 does not have any new capital projects, so you'll see a significant decrease from FY21 expenses where we were working on capital projects, no new ones this year.
And Terry Willoughby, for the record, there is one remaining capital project, the Vista Grande project, which is still hanging out there, was still approved in RDA 1, and it's just not been started yet. There's some right-of-way issues and other issues before that project can go forward. But it's still there, and there's still cash and funding available.
So my question is, I know that we're obligated to pay TDVA, what is it, 1.3 million out of RDA 2, up to 1.3 million out of RDA 2 in property tax revenue for the convention center. Is that the number that's included here?
Jenny Cartwright for the record. We have slightly less than the 1.3 million because we don't anticipate reaching that level this current fiscal year. So the requested pass-through is the 1.2, the 1204890 number in the tentative budget. However, if we receive more funds, we will be obligated to pass through up to that $1.3 million.
Right, that's our total obligation, but up to that amount. But if we exceed that amount in property taxes, then we're only required to pass through 1.3.
Jenny Cartwright, yes, that's correct.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Cates?
if I could just add to that, under the agreement, if we fall short in a given year, that's the extent of our obligation. And in some subsequent year, we don't have to make up that transfer if it's below the 1.3. Thank you.
And there are no supplemental requests for the redevelopment agency budgets.
Okay, do we have any obligations? We also had redevelopment area 1. Were there any remaining funds in there, and do we have any obligations in that regard?
Terry Willoughby, for the record, that's the Vista Grande project that's still committed. It just has not begun yet. It's still funded in RDA 1.
I just have a question. The money that's coming in through that RDA 1 that is no longer being spent because it's, except for the last project, that goes into the general fund then?
Terry Willoughby, for the record, no, because there's still outstanding commitments. There's no more property taxes coming in. It's just finishing up that last project and earning interest.
Say no more property taxes. There was an increase in property taxes, I'd assume, from the developments that went there that helped pay for this project?
My understanding is RDA 1 is closed, it's done. RDA 2 is still getting property tax.
So for clarification purposes, RDA 1 is closed, shut down. There are no new revenues coming into RDA 1. However, there still are funds in that fund that are available to be spent. Is that right?
Terry Willoughby, for the record, that's exactly correct.
Okay.
Any funds, there's still cash in the fund, and any interest revenue that would still accrue to that fund are available, but it's committed for the Vista Grande project.
Okay. And do we know what the balance is in that fund?
I will bring that to you tomorrow. I don't know the exact balance.
Not critical, just questioning, where we are. Any other questions, folks? No? Okay.
And the final group of funds for the tentative budget are the capital projects funds, which are on tab 10 and summarized on page 7 of 8. A large overall note on this is that, of course, we don't have those capital improvement projects in these funds. So you will see changes to these once the capital improvement program is established for fiscal year 23, and those projects are funded through the capital projects funds. There are just a few things that are included in the tentative budget. The gaming revenue, which is dedicated to IT and facilities projects for $300,000 per year, is included in the presented tentative budget. And pretty much everything else is pending finalization of the capital improvement program. The Regional Transportation Fund does have some ongoing operations and maintenance activities that are funded in the tentative budget, along with some personnel costs. And there are no supplementals for the capital projects funds.
Commissioners, questions? My binder only has 10 tabs. I don't know if these others have more, but there's nothing more?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Cates?
If I could just step back to the RDA 1 discussion, just for the sake of clarity for the board and the public. The way the RDAs work, both RDA 1 and RDA 2, I just want to clarify that, because Commissioner Tarkanian mentioned a tax increase, and I just want to clarify how they function and how they work. So the RDA, when they created RDA 1, they looked at all of the taxes, the property taxes that were being taken in for the property in that district that was formed. And that was North County, Topsy Lane area, et cetera. And when they created RDA, they capped that tax collection that comes into the general fund at that assessed value. As that land becomes developed or improved and that assessment goes up, that creates a tax increment. That increment goes into RDA 2 or RDA 1, or both of them for that matter, and that is what is used to do improvements in that district. So it's not a tax increase, it's an increase in the assessed value of the property over time. And as the discussion was, RDA 1 is now defunct, that increment is now coming into the general fund. And when RDA 2 obligations are done, that increment will also come to the general fund in the future. Thank you.
That was the point I was trying to make, that the money, there's been an increase in property taxes from that development that now goes into the general fund, and we're seeing the benefit of it.
Mr. Ingles?
In addition, 2017-18, the grand jury recommended dissolving RDA 1. And then those funds were primarily used by the township of Genoa to improve the town hall, fix the church, do some heavy maintenance on some of the buildings that had been neglected over the years.
Okay. Additional comments, questions? So where exactly do we stand on this? I'm not sure. We've gone through this agenda item number 1. It's listed for possible action. If there's no additional comments or questions, I would like to know where we go from here, and then before I open it up to public comment.
Terry Willoughby, for the record, no action today. Tomorrow, we'll be bringing it back, I believe, for approval of the tentative budget and your decision on the supplementals. County Manager Cates will be making some assessments of the supplementals that he'll be presenting tomorrow, and then you'll have the ability to do the final vote tomorrow.
So are you suggesting that, barring closing public comment here, that we're done for the day?
Terry Willoughby, I am. And
Just wanted to
yeah.
That's music to Mr. Tarkanian's ears, right? I mean,
And,
and mine too, and mine
Exactly,
also.
thank you. Throw
Okay,
yourself
not just
under the
you,
bus.
not just you. I have a doctor's appointment at 1 also, so I'll make that. So anyways, okay. So if there's nothing further from the board, then we'll go to the item on the agenda. Thank you very much for your presentations. Very, very clear, concise, a very good report. I think hopefully you've answered our questions, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow to take a look at some action on this, I suppose. So with that, once again, thank you for your time. And at this time, then, we will go into public comment on this particular item, okay? Because we haven't done that, okay? So anyways, on the, for possible action discussion, at this time, I'll open the floor for public comment to folks in chambers, if there's any public comment to offer on this particular item. Sensing none, I will ask Ms. Johnson if there's public comment on this particular item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Online.
Marcia Johnson for the record. There's no public comment online at this time.
Wow, okay, good. So bring it back to the board for any other things? Okay, so I
Move we
will,
adjourn.
well, no, we can't do that just yet, okay? That was public comment on that item. Now we need to go into closing public comment. right? Okay, yep, see?
Okay. You've got the program.
You don't have a copy, okay. So, yes.
I didn't cut down a tree.
Okay, so based on that, then we will go to closing public comment. At this time, public comment will be taken on those items that are within the jurisdiction and control of the Board of County Commissioners or those agenda items where public comment has not already been taken. So, closing public comment, Ms. Bobby Thompson.
Well, yes, good afternoon, or still good morning. Bobby Thompson for the record, Director of the Great Minden Tahoe Airport. I was really very interested in the presentation this morning by Community Services. But one thing that Scott Morgan left out that I think is very important to our community is back in January, we had our winter visit from the Navy Blue Angels, who of course be coming here for the air show in October. We took them, absolutely, we took them to the community center to say, rather than going to a physical fitness center, let's look at the equipment here because they have to work out to stay in those little suits they wear. So see if the equipment here satisfies your needs. And I can tell you those Navy personnel were totally impressed with the equipment that we have to offer in our community center. And it is excellent. And even beyond that, under Mr. Morgan's leadership and the leadership of his team and the team he's created there, it's so important, I think, for our community to know that that equipment was purchased through fundraising efforts of the Community Foundation and not from taxpayer dollars. And I think that's something we should all be very proud of, that our community stepped forward and did that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Almost started to call you Bobby Williams, I guess. Okay. Ms. Marcia, any other public comment here in chambers? Sensing that, Ms. Johnson, do we have any public comment online?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Marcia Johnson for the record. At this time, there's no closing public comment.
Based on that now, Mr. Royce, we can adjourn, okay? Thank you very much for your attention, gentlemen.
Recording stopped.